Have we got everybody?
Yep.
Great. Well, it's 10 a.m. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a quarterly meeting of the Budget Committee. So I'd like to start off by welcoming our new members. So we have Joy with us this morning and also Jeffrey. Welcome to both of you. And thanks. And also this will be the first budget meeting, I believe, we are missing Tom.
Oh, that's right.
Oh, goodness. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No worries. He's awfully prompt. Hello, Jeffrey. Nice to see you.
Jeffrey, welcome.
I'll reach out to Tom.
Glad to be here. I didn't see the video thing at the bottom of the screen. I had to turn that on.
All right. That's good. Hey, I've been doing these calls for years and I still forget to unmute myself. So we all have our continued learning curves. Let's give it just a moment and see if Counselor Campbell is en route.
Well, I know Layla must be relieved, but this is a really exciting start to a new budget period. This is going to be really cool.
Not relieved yet.
It's
coming.
Well,
Hey, Catherine.
Yes, Kit?
Can you take this chance to introduce the new, committee member to, at least to me? I haven't met two of them, I think.
Yes,
Oh,
thank you.
yes.
Thank
Good
you,
idea.
Kit. Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion. And I was just thinking that you're a veteran now.
Yeah.
There we go. Well, let's go ahead and go around the room. Maybe with this many people, it's a little awkward for everybody to say who they are. So the way that the panels show up on my screen in the upper left, we've got Counselor Jerry Spegman and myself and Counselor Brad Hart. Also Counselor Linda Kozlowski, also Council President Linda Kozlowski, and then Layla Aman, our city manager, Joy Nord, who is new to the committee and is a citizen member, Kit Keating, we've got yourself, who's here for her second round. I think it's second round, right, of budget for you. Yeah, welcome back. And then we've got Nina Christ, our accounting manager, who's key to this process along with Layla. We have Chip Greening, who's now a veteran member of the budget committee, having served for several years. Jeffrey, do you go by Jeffrey or by Jeff?
Jeff is fine.
Okay, we have Jeff, and I apologize, Jeff, I don't have your last name in my mind yet.
Okay, last name is Sunshine. Easy name to remember. Spelled S-O-N.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. So Jeff Sunshine, who's also new to the committee as a citizen member. We've got Tom Campbell, who is going through his first budget meeting today, who's our newest member of council. We also have the Assistant City Recorder, Nancy Jones, who's here to assist. And then I see we have as a guest from the community, Randy Kugler, and somebody who's live streaming. The unfortunate thing about live stream is we can't tell who that is, but whoever that is, welcome. So I think that's it for everybody here. Thank you, Kit, for the reminder about that. Appreciate that. Okay, so I'm presuming everybody's got their agendas. We'll lead off with the third quarter financial review that Nina's going to take us through. And then Layla has a couple of items as it relates to preparation of and our work with the next budget. I think that that's primarily intended to make sure we're all oriented and on the same page, given that we have a number of new folk here. We want to make sure that any questions that haven't already been answered for you get answered, mostly as it relates to process. We're not going to be getting into any numbers as it relates to the next year's budget cycle in this meeting. That comes in our next meeting, and then Layla, I'm sure, will talk us through that as well. Yes, and also I'm chairing this morning simply because our prior chair, Dave Dillon, has now stepped down from the committee. And so, and again, I'll ask Layla to take us through this. As we get started in the budget cycle, we'll be nominating and voting on a new chair. And our tradition is typically that that's a citizen member of the community, although I don't think that's actually a requirement. So we'll talk that through. Are there any questions about the agenda before I turn it over to Layla? All right, then let's go forth. Layla?
So actually, I'm going to kick it straight over to Nina.
Okay, let's see, I'm gonna share my screen. Am I live?
You're good.
Good. Okay, great. So this information is just an overview from the finance report that I sent to you guys on Friday and posted on the website. Normally, I just kind of talk it through, but I thought this time it might be a little more interesting and beneficial to everyone to have some visual information. So I'll just get started here. The first one, and where I know most people have a lot of questions, is the revenue from collections. So we had 1.6 million year to date. So that's from July through March in revenue from collections. And so this is just a graph kind of explaining what revenue from collections is.
Wow.
So of that 1.6 million, you can see our largest revenue, as we all know, is room tax collections. And then we've got a little bit of franchise fees, business license, 13% with short-term rental licenses. A lot of that is due to the increase in license fee that went into effect this fiscal year. And then planning and inspection fees and tech fees. Tech fees are generated from e-permitting, so building permits, and then also service fees.
Where is the building permit?
I'm
The fee
sorry?
for the building permit.
So that would just be under tech fees. So that's the service fee that you pay when you get a building permit, when you pay for that online.
Oh, okay. So it's in the planning inspection that
That's also in the general fund. So that's for planning services and inspection fees. So inspection fees would be for like short-term rentals when we do the annual inspection. Or I'm sorry, every 3 years, so periodic inspection. New short-term rentals get an inspection. Am I missing anything, Layla?
No,
just
just to clarify that building related inspections and building plan review are restricted to the building fund. So those fees come in as revenue in the building fund. The general fund, we receive the tech fees associated with those transactions.
so if I'm building a new house, get a building permit, where is it going to be?
In the building fund.
Zero. So you reclassify to the building fund.
Yeah, so we established a building fund, and this is just good historical background for folks, that the general fund used to include the building department. Revenue that's collected through the building department can only be used to operate the building department. Up until a few years ago, the building department ran in deficit and so was being subsidized by the general fund. It's now running in the positive. And so we created a separate fund to separate those funds out from the general fund so that we could ensure that those funds are going only towards building related purposes. So it used to be a line item in the general fund. It is now, I believe it was last fiscal year, the building fund was created. And so now all of that revenue goes into the building fund.
Okay, thank you. I saw it. I
Yeah.
see it in the
No, it's a
building.
great question. Yeah.
Well, the reason why is I did pay some building permit. So I said, where is it? That's my
Where's it
question.
going?
I want to know where it is. Thank you. Thank you.
You bet.
Great. Does anyone else have any questions on this revenue from collections?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
So, creating a building fund, does that make it an enterprise fund then, Layla?
It is a special revenue fund, and I'm actually going to go over all of that in my presentation.
Okay, I'll wait.
Yeah, good question.
Okay. And then here we just have a comparison year to date, third quarter, from fiscal year 22-23, and then this fiscal year 23-24. So you can see we're tracking pretty closely. Total combined general fund and TLT is 1.4 million. We're about 31,000 down from this point last fiscal year. Revenue for the third quarter of this fiscal year includes second, third, and fourth quarters from 2023. And then the last quarter that we'll get in for this fiscal year is first quarter of 2024. We've met our budgeted projection in TLT, and we have about 38,000 to meet our budgeted revenue in general fund, which we expect will far exceed for first quarter. Any questions on that? Okay. Next, we have third quarter general fund revenue from other agencies. This is pretty straightforward, 60% police fire. Those are our IGAs with Wheeler, Nehalem, and the state park. State revenue sharing, and then the Nia County excise tax, liquor tax, and cigarette tax. And then for uses of money and property, that was pretty high over our budgeted revenue. Big part of that was the sale of Old City Hall, which was 638. But then the bigger part is the earned interest. So just a note for folks, we have an LGIP account, which is a savings account. We earn interest on that money. So we keep all of our operating money in the checking account, what we need to pay the bills. And then we have everything else in this state-run savings account. So I just included a little chart here so folks could see just a dramatic increase in the rates that we're at. So we're at 5.2, which is a historic high for us, which is why our earned interest is so far above what we normally see.
Nina, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been crazy to see just the revenue that we're getting on it. And we don't budget for that because it's so difficult to predict, but it sure is nice when we get it. And then for materials and services, I know a lot of folks usually have questions about this. And so within materials and services, we have professional services, travel and training, dues and subscriptions, other building operations, and like materials and building supplies, and then planning and zoning. And 81% of that is professional services. So that is a large chunk. Planning and zoning would be our city planner. And then to further break that down, I did a chart for you guys of the professional services and what that entails. So large part is the city attorney, and then we've got just our general IT, financial software, which is Cassell, planning services, our annual audit, the finance consultant, which is assisting with that goal of level up Manzanita, and then miscellaneous. And that's it. That's all I have. Does anyone have any questions?
This is Jeff Sunshine. You just made me think of something. I've been reading about a lot of cities are being held hostage to foreign hackers that are taking over their data and asking for a lot of money. Do we have any cybersecurity, high levels of security in place?
We do. We actually just added that to our insurance policy last fiscal year. So we do.
Is it software or is it just insurance?
It's insurance. And then we also have our IT department has very thorough. I'm not exactly sure what. Layla, maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah.
It's a good question, Jeffrey. And I don't know if Josh can actually vocalize here, but I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole with it. But we do have pretty sophisticated measures in place in terms of security and tracking, largely due to Josh. I can't specifically tell you what those are, but we do. And we did put in place cybersecurity insurance. I think it was 2 years ago. So
Good.
we're doing everything we can on our end. But yeah, that's a real issue.
So this year, the city attorney fees are gobbling up a big chunk. Do we consider this year to be an outlier as opposed to historical expenditures on city attorney?
Yes.
Great, well, that's all I have.
Okay. Well, I'll take it from here, Catherine. Okay, great.
Please.
So I am also going to share my screen here and just go through the rest of the agenda. And I invite folks, as I go through the presentation, to ask any questions you have. So please feel free to raise your hand or just get my attention somehow. So I'm just getting my screens reoriented here. I trust you can see my screen okay? Okay. All right. So today's meeting, kind of 3 objectives I have today to do sort of a review. So for some of you, old hat, this will be, for some of you, will be brand new. But I think it's always healthy and good to go through what the process will be, kind of remind folks how we get from point A to point Z. And then we've had some changes to funds. So I thought as just kind of an introductory as well for our new members and then folks in the community of just reminding folks kind of what our funds and departments are, is the way that Oregon budget law works and how we budget is in departments. And so I want to walk through that and then just talk through some general assumptions about projected resources and requirements that will, of course, provide you quite a bit more detail on when I present the budget later this month. Okay. So I do want to start really, it's always good to just sort of refresh ourselves with what is the role of the budget committee. You guys have a pretty strong role early in the year and then we meet quarterly. So I think it's always good to start with this. And you're here to help really review, question the budget that it's proposed. And then ultimately, you all make a recommendation to the governing body, which 5 members of the 10 that serve as the budget committee are made of, the city council. But we said the budget committee sets the tax rate, which is the amount needed to balance the city's budget. And I think it's important to remember too that the budget committee's role isn't policy. The budget committee is made up of policy makers, which is the city council. But the budget committee's role isn't really to establish or eliminate programs or services. I prepare a budget, as the budget officer that reflects the governing body's goals. So the city council has set goals, both service goals as well as policy goals. And then my job is to reflect those goals in the city's budget. So there's public participation that occurs at these meetings, and but ultimately the final authority to approve the budget rests with the city council. Okay, so the budget process, I don't know how I ended up with this silly looking slide, so sorry, I just was too tired to reformat it, so we'll just go with it. But today, here we are. We're going to go over just kind of get everyone oriented so that when we hit the first budget hearing, which will be April 30th, that we hit the ground running. So some of these basic things you're comfortable with, the language you're comfortable with, so that you can walk into the budget process when we deliver the budget to you. You have a good basis for which to review that for the hearings. So that's the purpose of today's meeting. The first budget hearing will be held on April 30th. That's where I will deliver the budget message. I will review the general fund revenue and then go through all the general fund departments, and I'll talk a little bit about that today. Review the tourism fund, the city hall fund, and the public safety department will present their budget. So that's a lengthy meeting. The second budget committee budget hearing will be held the next day, the following day on May 1st. And that's where the budget for the building fund will be presented, the water utility, public works reserve, and then the SDC fund, which includes water, storm, and parks. And then on May 7th is when the budget committee will hold its public hearing, take public comment, deliberate, and then vote on revenue sharing, and then make their recommendation to the city council. And then the city council will hold a hearing on May 29th. That difference is to allow us proper time to notice, and we'll get a final presentation of the budget and then adopt the budget, including the revenue sharing and all the associated resolutions with the budget. So it goes pretty quick. Well, it might feel long during some of the meetings, but we try to keep it entertaining. Any questions about that before we start moving into the funds? So just, Tom, you had asked us earlier about what is the building fund? And so I wanted to kind of walk through and just sort of remind everybody what the different funds are. So we have different types of funds. We have a general fund, and that's the fund that's used to account for most of the physical activities of the city. So there are proprietary funds, and so that's also an enterprise fund. So that's like the water utility, and that's established for the operations that are it's basically financed like a business. So we have a utility, we offer a service, we charge utility rates. Those things can only be used for operation of that utility itself. Then there are special revenue funds, and those are funds to account for the proceeds of a specific revenue source. So the tourism fund falls into this category as well. That are legally restricted for specific purposes. So the building fund, we'll see in a later slide, falls here. Then there are capital fund project funds. So the city hall fund, these are funds that are used to deal with major construction or major capital funds. And then a reserve fund is established to accumulate money from year to year for specific purchases. So I did some strikeouts for kind of some of the fund names that have changed and the funds that were dropped. So at our last budget committee meeting, we went through this in detail, so I won't go through it here, but we have a memo drafted on why these funds were all closed. And the new budget will be oriented around this new fund structure. So, which looks like this. So we'll have the general fund. Our only proprietary fund is the water utility fund. Our special revenue funds are the building fund, the transportation fund, and the tourism fund. Our capital projects funds, there are two. It's the SDC fund, which is inclusive of all three SDCs, and then the City Hall expansion fund. And then finally, we have one public works funds. Any questions about the fund structure or funds themselves or?
So what are the restrictions on the special revenue funds?
It depends on the fund. So, and I can't recite the ORS specifically, but there's an ORS that governs how building funds can be spent, but broadly speaking, they can only be spent on funds related, activities related to the building department. So the inspections, plan review, those kinds of things. The transportation fund is, I believe it's restricted by city ordinance, and that takes in certain revenues are dedicated to that fund, and that's for the maintenance of the road system. And then the tourism fund is also restricted by state law for use of tourism promotion and facilities. Any other questions?
Yeah, so all of this the controversy that we're seeing about the accounting for indirect costs associated with the water utility, do we apply a similar um, um, formula for transfers from the special revenue funds. So that the city gets some of that money into the general fund for other purposes.
Yeah, so the model includes all of the city's funds. And it also actually includes city departments that are funded through the general fund. So currently we only do transfers, indirect cost transfers for the water utility and the building fund. We don't do it for the transportation fund, largely because we have to subsidize the transportation fund with general fund. So we'd be paying ourselves to pay ourselves back, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If the transportation fund had sufficient resources to sustain itself, then in that case, I think I would probably recommend a transfer. But currently, we're transferring general fund money into the transportation fund, so it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. The tourism fund, we do get a certain amount of administrative overhead off of those funds that go into the general fund already. And then we have utilized those resources with kind of guidance and support of the city attorney, as well as working with the Tillamook County Visitors Association to use those funds more broadly to help support certain staff positions. And so we haven't proposed an indirect cost transfer for that, although strictly speaking, it would certainly be appropriate. I think we have just recently tried to expand the use of those funds to appropriate uses, but just haven't crossed that bridge just yet. We haven't charged SEC funds because, again, those typically are subsidized by general fund, but for the water construction fund, we did budget 1 year for a transfer from the water construction fund, but made the decision to not do that as a policy. So we haven't done that. And again, the City Hall Fund receives money from the general fund, and then the Public Works also receives money from the general fund. So those wouldn't be appropriate for indirect cost transfers. But the ones that are do pay those transfers, and that's currently the water utility and the building fund. And again, just as I say kind of every year, this is a standard operating procedure. All cities have some version of an indirect cost transfer process. Oh.
Yep.
Any other questions? All right. So again, you have 8 total funds. Those are them. Then we also have departments, just to kind of mix things up a little bit for you. So when you receive and review the budget, for those who've done this before know this, but for the new folks, you'll have department budgets too. And department budgets often include staff that are funded through multiple funds. And so I thought I'd try to demystify that a little bit, but I don't want to get too caught up in the weeds on it. I just did want to kind of give people a sense of what are the departments, because as you're reviewing the budgets, having a sense of what our departments do is probably helpful, and knowing who's in them. And then when the department has presented their budgets, I ask them to do that. They'll describe more about kind of what their day-to-day operations are. So we have some more context there. So administration. So the administration is funded by the general fund. So you'll see a revenue for the general fund, and then you'll see an administration worksheet. And that's like the office of the city manager, city recorder. That's me. The finance, we provide finance services for all departments, human resources services for all departments. Obviously, I oversee all departments. We provide services to the visitor center. We do the short-term rental program, and planning and development services are all housed in the general funds. I'm sorry, the administration's department. The staff included in the department budget is 100% of my salary and the accounting manager's salary. The city recorder's salary, only 60% is covered here, and I'll talk about that in a minute why. She's partly a court department employee. And then we also pay for the majority, the administration carries in that personnel line item, the salary and benefits for the short-term rental program manager, the development services manager, 40%, and code enforcement officer carry about 20% of his salary in the administration's budget. So when you see that personnel line item, it's covering all of these people. Any questions about that?
Yeah, this, uh,
Oh, sure.
services, what gets done in that activity?
Planning and development services, is that what you said, Jeff?
Development services,
Yeah.
planning and development services.
Yeah, so that's all of our land use related activities. So folks that are applying for a land use permit to develop in the city would submit a land use application and go through the city.
Okay. All right.
So that leads to like planning commission hearings and things of that nature. Okay. The second department within the general is also funded entirely by the general fund is our public safety department, and that is they're responsible for public safety and code enforcement. Our code enforcement reports here, but is funded through the general fund, just like everybody else in our police department. So we have 4 full-time staff here: police chief, police sergeant, and 2 police officers. There's also court. So again, I mentioned our assistant city recorder, a portion of her salary is paid out of the staff line item in the court department budget. Court isn't just the municipal court itself, starring Judge Larry Blake. It is actually also a great deal of it is a lot of back end paperwork that Nancy does with respect to citations. So there's a lot of work that gets done on the back end before, after, and of course during court. And then again is the general fund funded department. So the building department is funded by the building fund. And so that is for building permitting and inspection services only. And the staff that is included in this department budget include our development services manager acting in his capacity as our building official, and then a very small portion of the short-term rental program manager. The tourism department, which is part of the tourism fund, includes our visitor center, but it also provides resources for facility maintenance and code enforcement. So the staff included in this budget, so in the personnel line item for this budget, include our public works director, operations manager. Once we hire one, we're hiring if anyone's interested. 2 senior utility workers, 1 utility worker, and 1 code enforcement officer. And I just kind of wanted to highlight for folks too that we have a public works department, but the public works department is funded by the water utility fund, the tourism fund, the transportation fund, and the general fund. Just so folks kind of understand how things sort of work and piece together. But Public Works is the department provides the day-to-day operations for the water utility, for roads, for parks, for a storm drain, and they do all of our tourism facility maintenance. It includes a staff of 6, which is our Public Works director, the open position of an operations manager, 2 senior utility workers, a utility worker, and a utility clerk. Again, the majority of those positions, I think it's about 4.5 of the FTE that are 6 are funded through the water utility fund. The transportation department funds a portion of those staff salaries as well, and they do road maintenance, trail maintenance, safety signage, kind of anything road related, right-of-way clearing, etc. So when trees come down in the right-of-way, it's the road fund that pays for their removal. And our public works team also maintains our parks, which is funded through the general fund. Okay, so those are the various funds and departments. Does anyone have any questions? Is that helpful to get kind of the big picture view? Okay, sweet. Thanks.
Layla, have we ever considered TLT funds for park maintenance at all? Is that possible, or is that not included in TLT tax?
Park that, but no, we haven't. I believe parks are distinct, but I don't know. So let me look into that. It's an interesting question. We do, because many of our parks are have visitor facilities. A lot of the costs that used to be funded by that department, supplies, for example, are now being paid for out of the tourism fund because that's generally who
That's great.
it's serving. So we've made some strategic changes to that. I don't think that like the general maintenance of our city-owned parks is something we can talk more about it, but I think that that's
Okay,
probably,
just wondering.
yeah. Yeah. Good question. Okay. Well, should I move on? We're making good tracks. I meant to say that I didn't think this meeting was going to take 2 hours, but I do want to make sure we have plenty of time to answer any questions folks have so you feel really well prepared because we're making good tracks, I guess is what I'm trying to say. All right, so we are going to have a new look to the budget this year. This is in large part due to the fantabulous model that our finance advisor has created for us. It's a thing of beauty. It's actually just been a wonderful resource, and it's just fantastically, I don't know if easy is the right word to use, but it's definitely an efficient resource for me. So it rolls up into something that looks like this. So all of the department budgets I just mentioned will include a worksheet that looks like this. And I just thought to get everyone on the same page, we would sort of familiarize ourselves with this. If you've taken the budget training already, which I know all of you have, maybe multiple times at this point, you should all of these should look pretty familiar to you. So again, just like is required by budget law, the historical actuals, these are the actual actuals actually, will be included. So for the 2 years preceding the current fiscal year. So that gives you a good frame of reference to sort of see what we've spent in the past versus what is budgeted for in this current fiscal year, which would be fiscal year 24. And then it will also include, my estimated actuals for the end of the year. So I need to make, and also my team need to make estimates of what we expect to spend by June 31st. I will note that we tend to estimate a little high, just to allow ourselves a little flexibility. And that estimation is what provides us with our estimate for our beginning fund balance for the fiscal year.
Leila,
Yeah, Kit.
I think this is a game changer with the estimated fiscal year data. We didn't have it last year. It really confused, people on that. This is a game changer to add this column.
Great.
The estimated actuals is a good column, good data.
Great, thank you for that. So those will be included. So yeah, you'll have a framework to understand the sort of beginning fund balance assumptions. And then it will also include what I propose. So as your budget officer, I'll give you my proposed budget, and then that's what you will be looking through and discussing. Once you get to that May 7th meeting, we'll develop a new budget that reflects what was approved by the budget committee, and that's what will be presented to City Council for adoption on May 29th. And then the final budget will include what the governing body adopts. And for example, last year, we had to make a last minute shift of some road funds because they weren't paid out by the end of the fiscal year. And we did that between the budget committee and the City Council hearing, which resulted in about $500,000 change. And one of the budget committee members did ask that, as a courtesy, that we let the budget committee know. And so I took that feedback to heart. And so if there are any changes between the time the budget committee adopts and or approves and the governing body adopts, I'm looking at Nina to remind me that we will send a circle back to the budget committee, so you have that information. So thanks for that feedback. Any questions about this? Cool. Yeah, and hopefully none of the estimated actuals come out as a surprise to anyone because you get those quarterly financial reports, and particularly for council, you should already be seeing stuff. And that's again why we provide those to council and to the budget committee, is if you do see something that somehow we've missed, please let us know. Like, that's part of it. It's part of the role of the budget committee. Is this is you guys are a team that's really reviewing this document to make sure it's accurate, reflective, where we're headed. So appreciate that high level of detailed review. Okay, so in terms of revenue, I can sort of share broadly where I think we're going, and then the budget will show you more specifically where we're going. But I did want to go over a few things that you can expect to hear me talk about, or members of my team talk about during the hearing process. So the water utility revenue will look different this year. It is the increase for the first time in 10 years. Now, we don't have a full year's worth of data, so we're going to do our best. Probably take a more conservative approach this year, and then hopefully, by next year we'll have a better sense of that. But we feel really good about the estimates that we do have in place. And I am working with our finance advisor to propose a policy reserve, because my current budget model shows that we are in a good place to propose that, just even with 1 year of new rates. And so I'm very excited for the water utility to get into this next space, as our general fund has. And recall that change that we made to add a policy reserve did help our bond rating, actually. So little moves like this are beneficial to the city in the long run, and just for budgeting and planning. We'll also look at building, but probably not this year. So the transient lodging tax, I'm currently planning to estimate just a 10% increase over what I estimated last year. We're tracking, as you saw with the revenue projections, will come in above what we estimated, but I do think it'll be within 10% of what we estimated last year. We are seeing a revenue plateau with the TLT, which is better than a decline. So we did see a decline over a couple of years. I think it'll probably still decline a little bit, just based on talking with folks throughout the county and the coast, and just other providers of short-term rentals in particular, that things aren't bottoming out. They're not rapidly declining, but holding steady where we are. I think that's great. So that's what I have estimated there. I could pause for a second there and see if anybody has any questions about either of those things, because those are our two big revenue sources. And I've had some. Oh, go ahead.
On the TLT estimates, being a short-term rental owner myself, and talking with some of the managers, they're telling me that they believe that we're going to return to pre-COVID levels, that it is declining significantly. And personally, we've had difficulty keeping our place rented. So it might be good to make sure that we talk to some of the management companies and understand what their experience is currently.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I did certainly reach out to at least one, maybe two. And the estimates that I've used were based on an average rate of growth prior to COVID. So the estimates that I'm even projecting for this fiscal year will be quite a bit under what I anticipate we'll get in this current year, because I'm trying to budget towards that potential future. We also have, there's uncertainty around the short-term rental cap and how that will be managed. So I think proceeding cautiously with our revenue projections for this year, but being reasonable is advisable. So that's where I'll be coming from, and what my estimate will be based on is assuming COVID never happened and we continue to grow at an average rate of growth. What would that look like? Okay, thanks for that. Oh, sorry, that shouldn't say transient lodging tax. That should say fees for services. So we increased and added new fees. We'll be a little conservative this year till we have a little bit more data to be able to make reasonable estimates, but you'll see some change there. The big change was last year when we upped the short-term rental renewal fee. Building an SDC fund, so it's steady. The boom, as before, has definitely quieted, softened. We're going to see probably less revenue come into the SDC funds as well as the building department by the end of the year. So we're budgeting a little more conservatively in terms of the revenue. And then finally, the intergovernmental agreements you'll see will reflect the updated terms that were just approved by council this month.
Hi, this is Jeff. SDC, what is that, storm drain or something?
Oh, thank you for reminding me of my acronym problem. It's a system development charge.
Okay.
So
That wasn't even close.
those are, yeah. It was a good try though.
You know about this to say about assumptions.
Yeah, I do.
So Leila, the on the building and SDC funds percolating up to council is a move to annex additional property up by the Highlands, with other building being anticipated for workforce housing. How will the building and SDC funds be impacted by that?
Oh, that's a great question. Those projects will be subject to SDCs and to permit fees. So we do expect that there would be some revenue there. I don't know. And again, we were conservative, so we did not include those developments in our estimate. This actually reflects, I think, just a handful of new homes.
That would match the spirit of how this has been budgeted in the last couple of years. Nothing's been approved, nothing's gone to planning commission, nothing's gone to council. So my assumption, I hadn't thought to ask that question, Tom. It's a good one. My assumption would be that we'll be receiving from the budget officer a plan that doesn't speculate about that. And we can add that in later as need be, but we wouldn't go in assuming that. Was that correct, Leila?
Yeah, and certainly not at the stage. Like if we had something that we had, like you said, issued building permits on, then, well, we would already have the revenue. So, or if we had maybe made the land use decision and we knew they were coming in for permits, then we would probably include that into our estimate. So other cities I've worked in, for example, we had issued land use permits on pretty big projects and we knew that they were coming in for development permits that year. And so we were able to make our estimates with that. But if they didn't have a land use permit, we didn't include it.
It's
So
good
this
to
just
confirm.
includes-
It's good to confirm it because it does sort of get to
Yeah.
some of the underlying assumptions about, of course, we would include this, of course, we wouldn't. We had a lot of discussion last year that was useful, I think, for everybody about the nature of how conservative some of the revenue projections are and why, which if you compare it to perhaps other experience, particularly business experience, it's very odd seeming, but there's a reason for it and a logic. So I'm looking forward to getting into discussions about that when we're actually going through and getting our numbers presented and we talk about the assumptions. And with the number of new folks we have, it's certainly a great opportunity to talk that through very thoroughly. So we'll go at a slow and steady pace and we'll take as much time as we need to make sure everybody's on the same page and understands the principles behind it. And then whether we agree or disagree will be, of course, part of our discussion as well. But we've got a lot of onboarding to do this year, and I think it'll be good for all of us.
I have one more. Expenditure. So yeah, the spending side of things. So in terms of personnel services, the city council approved the salary schedule last week for a 3% cost of living adjustment for staff. We are proposing a few changes to the public works department. So I've been working through some budgeting on that. but I will be recommending as part of my budget proposal that the 2 utility workers be promoted into a senior utility worker positions, and that we create a full-time out of the part-time utility worker position. The purpose of this is, again, kind of part of our effort to level up and train staff. I want Dan to have a greater depth of redundancy, particularly when it comes to water treatment and certifications. And so by putting our 2 utility workers, both who have been here for several years, into a senior position, they're then now required to get certifications. And so we'll be holding them to that account. And I think they're both ready for that. Dan believes that's true as well. And so our proposal includes those shifts in staffing as well. So that is there. I don't think there's any other personnel changes that I'm proposing, other than I think all of you are aware that we do have one additional FTE that I'm not proposing to fill this year, and that is the permit and building tech position, because we've sort of seen a decline in building activity. Scott's able to take on some more, and Chris are able to sort of divide those responsibilities and effectively provide the services the city needs to, with one less FTE. So this fiscal year, I'm holding back on that position to see how things work and how we can deal with that. And I feel good about that approach. When you guys approved Walt Wendelowski, the city council did, as a backup planner. This was part of that strategy, that if we do indeed get inundated, then we have a backup plan and we're able to address that. But this seems the most fiscally responsible approach to this change. So that's the only other change I have with respect to the personnel side of things. I'd be happy to take any questions you have, if any. Okay. Capital improvement plans. We're going to talk about that tomorrow, actually, at City Council's work session. Dan and I will be bringing you our proposed CIP for the year, what you can expect are inflation adjustments to everything, and then this big legislative appropriation we got after I got the draft budget done. So I've gone back and now revised the budget to include those funds. So that's a 2.709 million, just for folks that may not be familiar, that the legislature allocated to the city of Manzanita to build infrastructure for needed housing. And so tomorrow we'll talk in detail about that project and how we are going to propose to spend those resources and what that project could potentially look like. So more on that tomorrow. But that will be included in that, as well as some policy related funding in the road department to cover the 20 is plenty implementation. Chip, you had a question?
I think I know the answer, but I'd like a confirmation. The governor is planning to veto some of the projects in that big appropriation that included the 2.7 for Manzanita. So I assume that Manzanita is not one of the ones being considered for a veto.
Not what we've heard yet. So,
okay.
So far, so good. And I think we
Fingers
planned
crossed.
for it. We planned for it. It will come. So
This is Jeff. Can you elaborate on this a little bit more? This is news to me.
Sure. So in the short session this year, the legislature passed a bill that allocated funding to cities all over the state of Oregon to build infrastructure that would support housing development. The city of Manzanita, so myself and my staff responded to a request for shovel-ready projects that would support needed housing last year. And did we have any projects? And we did. So we responded to that request. And then the legislature allocated that funding to us through, I can't remember the number of the bill off the top of my head right now, but allocated that funding to us through a bill this year. And so we're waiting for the governor to sign it. So hopefully I didn't just jinx us. That the city of Manzanita will receive that funding, and it's
Is this for low income or mid income? Is it where is the housing? I don't know anything about it.
well, the project that, so again, I'll talk a lot more detail about the project tomorrow, but the project that we put forward would provide water flow and pressure into the urban growth boundary, which would support all kinds of housing. So there's 2 affordable housing projects that are being proposed for that area. So this would support that, but it would also support all the housing that would be developed in that urban growth boundary, because we currently don't have adequate fire flow to support additional and certainly significant additional development in the urban growth boundary. So it's a necessary piece of infrastructure to open up that housing. And so that's kind of what the governor's goal was. People were saying, we want to build housing, but we don't have money for the infrastructure. And so that's what the legislature said is, okay, well, tell us what projects you need to build so that you can build the housing. And so a bunch of cities replied, and then the state put forward a bill that included us, and hopefully will once it crosses her desk.
Leila, this is Kate.
Hey,
Leila?
Kit.
Hey,
Yes.
when you talk about the urban growth boundary, and then the fund is subsidizing that, does it mean that we're going to expand the boundary of the urban growth in Manzanita?
Oh, no. So we won't expand the UGB, the urban growth boundary. The majority of the project is within city limits. And we can do capital projects in the urban growth boundary if it's on our property or if we have the permission of the property owner. So
Okay.
we are not anticipating doing annexation of any of the infrastructure because, you know, for example, we provide infrastructure to Pine Ridge and to other places that are in the urban growth boundary, but we would have an easement, an access easement. But the majority of the project is inside the urban growth boundary, inside the city limits.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. If any other questions about that come up, don't hesitate to ask. So materials and services, again, no major surprises here, just adjustments for inflation. There were some increases in insurance for property and for liability. The general fund professional services, so you'll see a proposal in there that, again, there's kind of general administration and then there's kind of goal related funds that are usually present in that line item. So this is the line item I tend to spend the most time on during the administration's budget process. But that will include things like the comprehensive plan. So you'll see a hefty number in there for that. There will be some funds for council communication and then finance. And then I'm also working on potentially getting an intern to provide some support to me during the comp plan community engagement process. So I'll go through that in detail during the administration's budget, but that's what you can expect there. And then we will start to draw debt service this year. So you'll see that reflected as well. We will begin to draw debt and accrue interest, but we will not begin paying debt service this fiscal year. So just as a reminder, maybe for the newer folks, that the city is taking out a special public works fund loan from the state of Oregon. We take that loan out. It's a reimbursement loan. So we will pay our contractor and then we submit that for reimbursement from the state. And as we draw that reimbursement, the state charges us interest. And then once the project is complete and we've closed out the construction, then the state will convert that to a permanent loan that will be sold to the bond bank at the interest rate at that time. So we accrue interest, I think it's 2%, 2.01% maybe. And then the rate is set permanently once it's sold to the bond bank, which we anticipate happening next fiscal year.
And that, of course,
Just a
is all
couple.
in reference to the City Hall project.
Oh, yeah, pardon me. Thank you. Yes, that's in reference to the City Hall construction project.
But we do have debt service that we're still paying on the underlying purchase of the property.
Yes, and thanks for noting that. And I'll note this when I do my budget presentation, but that debt service is now coming out of the non-department fund, which I didn't include in here, but there's a budget for non-department, which accounts for transfers and things of that nature that can't be categorized into a particular department. Yeah, not be included there. Okay, I think that's my last slide. It is. And I have to figure out how to stop sharing. So when the screens move themselves around, it takes a minute. Okay. Great. So does anyone have any questions about that? I hope that was a helpful orientation to get you ready to go about the budget. We're going to walk you through everything. We're going to give you kind of the highlights on the big changes as we go through the budget. We won't go through item by item, but we expect you to. And if you have questions that arise as you do that, you know, we want you to ask them. That's, again, as I said, this is 10 of you looking at this work builds confidence and transparency in the whole budgeting process. So we want to make sure we're responsive and providing you all the information you need to make your recommendation fully informed. So we're looking forward to another fun, successful budgeting year.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Looking at this budget report that you sent out, and it has in several of the departments, it has uses of money and property, which you're having you came in quite a bit over your budget. Are they all just interest on cash that's in savings? Because it runs across several.
Yeah, I'll let Nina answer that, but I believe that's correct.
Yes, that's correct. A couple of them have a couple other little line items in it, but yes, the majority of that is interest.
Well, and it was also the sale of Old City Hall.
That was for general fund only, but yes.
Any questions for Layla from council, from the budget committee? So Layla, I have a question. It just kind of has to do with the working rhythm. You know, you've laid out the dates and we can see the major milestones we had. What's your recommendation, or how do you want us to handle, and it's particularly more for folks who are doing this for the first time, but also for all of us. If we look at something and it's well in advance of the next meeting, if we've got questions, do you want us to give you a heads up about those questions, just one-on-one first, prior to meeting, or just describe a little bit about what you'd like that communication flow to be?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as you review the budget, if things come up that are stopping you from, like a question comes up and you feel like you need that answer to continue moving forward, I want you to reach out. We want to help you. Again, like I said, have all the information you need. If it's something that, is a little more in depth, and Catherine, you're always really good at making sure folks are kind of being clear about what they're doing, is would be better served in the public discussion forum. You can save your questions for them. But I think anything like, structural, anything like that, do please reach out and let us know if you see an error. If you see anything like that, it's easier if we catch that and then we'll note it in the budget hearing. But it's just helpful, I think, for everyone if you can feel free to ask those questions. And staff, we kind of ready ourselves for that. Once we provide you with the draft budget, we sort of anticipate getting some questions from people. So please do reach out.
Can I make a suggestion
Yes, Kit?
here? On this package here, maybe not all first, for the newcomer, maybe you don't realize that the budget is for 12 months, the whole fiscal year, and the actual is actually for as of the third quarter. So it's not the whole 12 months when you compare. So I would suggest to put had a year as of the third quarter, 9 months. So it will make it easier for people to understand the over and under. It's not 12-month to 12-month comparison.
Thank you. That's
It's a
helpful
12-month
feedback.
to 9-month comparison. So keep in mind when you look at the over and under. So when you see too much under, because we've not reached 12 months yet.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kip.
Okay, I would say I'm very much looking forward to this next run. We're going to have some good discussions. I want to clarify, make sure I'm I want to make sure I'm very clear. Questions or inquiries to Layla one-on-one are not have nothing to do with taking something out of the public discussion. This is all public work. So the other thing that generally happens or will happen is if things are simply a learning curve matter, that's fine. But also if Layla feels like we're going to all benefit from that learning curve, a question somebody asks individually can also then be brought up with a group for discussion. And we have found, or at least I've found in the 4 or so years I've been doing this, those are also very helpful because every year you do learn more. And even when you've come from working on or have experience with quite large budgets, which I know a number of you have got quite in-depth experience, there are a lot of nuances to a city budget and the public process that are actually different. And I know everybody told me that, but I still was like, what? For a couple of things, even despite the training from the state of Oregon. So we'll be learning together, and the policy questions that may come up, which are always useful and interesting, we benefit from. So I'm hoping we'll have some good productive, perhaps disagreement on some things, as well as some good questions. And we're all here to learn from each other. There's a great deal of experience in this group from many different angles. And so we want to make sure we get the full benefit of what everybody can bring. And we appreciate all your efforts to do the homework and ask questions and not let things go by if you're not clear about them. So thanks in advance for all the work that's coming on that, and to Layla and Nina for the work to come up. And remind me now, when will we next be meeting? What's our next key date?
April 30th.
Yeah, April 30th. And I think Chip has his hand raised.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chip.
Yeah.
I think it's important, since most or all of us have taken the training, to remember we are not supposed to talk to each other about the proposed budget. It's prohibited by the law. And so, but the questions to staff do not count. So we cannot ask questions from each other about, we cannot question each other about the proposed budget. On the other hand, we can discuss policy issues as we have been now about past budgets or how the city should do its budgeting. We just can't talk specifically about a proposed budget. And since it hasn't been proposed and won't be until the end of April, we're all free to discuss whatever we want right now.
Thanks, Chip.
Okay, then if there are no other questions or comments, I'd like to, we do. Joy, go ahead. Unmute, please.
Are we selecting a chairman of the budget committee today, or is that later?
I would like to propose we do that at our next meeting, if that's okay.
Yeah, you usually do it at the first budget committee, official budget committee meeting, so city didn't do these meetings before, but we do pre-meetings now. So at the official first budget committee meeting on April
30th,
you'll select a chair and vice chair.
Thanks, Joy, for clarifying. Is there anything else? Okay, I call this meeting adjourned at 11:10. Thank you very much, everyone.
Good meeting.
everyone.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you.